Hi everyone, and welcome to Proving Grounds. So I'd like to start by thanking our sponsors, Versprite, Vertivity, Tenable, Amazon, and Source of Knowledge. Please go and visit them out in the chill out area. So our next talk is on how to get and maintain your compliance without ticking everyone off by Rob Carson, Director of Security at Cherwell. He loves building and improving immature security programs, and he looks really dapper in a purple suit. Building.
No, it's
improving.
I have a tech writer.
Yeah. All right, before we get started, I just want to say the track's being recorded, so at the end when we do questions, I'm going to be running the mic around. Let's give Rob a warm welcome.
All right. Thank you, guys. All right, so how do we get and maintain compliance without pissing everybody off? So, one, realizing that, hey, it's never going to happen. We're going to have perfect compliance. So, let's just move on past that. Talk about some of the challenges that professionals face, basically being compliant but not necessarily fully secure, right? And then how creativity and outreach will get the job done, who to engage with and how to engage with different business units. And then still being able to call yourself a true security professional and not just feel like it's a big Swiss cheese, right? Everyone hear me okay? All right. So my background, Director of Security at Cherwell Software. Prior lives as well, I've done ISO 27001 twice. I've had a couple zero-flying audits, also done PCI, HIPAA. Going through FedRAMP right now, so it's a whole new adventure with NIST on steroids. And used to be a Marine Corps infantry officer. All right, so initial implementation. So this is a lot what it feels like if you're kicking off, an ISO compliance program, PCI, or anything like that. And one thing to recognize is that just as these young Marines here graduating from, going through boot camp, right? You graduate from boot camp, you're a infantryman. You're a provisional rifle infantryman. You go to special on school, follow-on schools, things like that. You're not necessarily a MARSOC operator or some sort of special forces ninja. So understanding that, hey, just because you passed your first audit does not mean you're going to be some, all-star ninja. All right, that's how it goes. So how do you do it? One. And I got my security architect in here, and that's a lot what it's like planning with him sometimes. Two, just try to boil the whole ocean. I've been guilty of this for sure. A lot of times you wind up, I try to boil the whole ocean, I wind up, just doing North Atlantic, and that still is why I don't hear anymore. But we'll get there. So what should you consider as you're kicking off the program? So there's impacting factors. So depending on the size of your organization, you're going to have different things. So personnel changes, so people are going to come and go. You're going to have potentially 24/7 support staff, depending on what kind of company you run. Explosive growth could be a big thing. That's definitely a huge challenge. Is how do you, as you're going down the road, trying to do your program, also change the tires while you're going down the road. Resistance to change, because change is hard. You sometimes get out for free hugs sometimes, it feels like. Like it's, people are used to doing things a certain way. Why can't I do it this way? Those kind of things. Like how do you, get to overcome those challenges? And ability to execute. That's another big piece too, is that, one of the things is nobody has an unlimited budget, nobody has unlimited time. So you have to stay focused on what's the most important part and understanding some things you're going to have to improve later on. And then external, so you have changes in statutory regulations, increasing customer requirements. And let's face it, I don't know how you guys feel, but I get these things from customers all the time. Why aren't you NERC? Why don't you have SOC 2? Why don't you have this? Why don't you have that? Because we'd be auditing hell all year long if that's what we did. We just picked up every single certification there was. And then we also have new vulnerabilities. The IT guys have it easier sometimes because let's face it, they have a new version of Windows every few years. We have a new vulnerability every day. So who here has ever felt that someone in their company might feel like this? Yeah. So, and that's one of the things, one of my favorite frameworks is ISO because it demands continuous improvement. And that's one of the best things about it. So you're compliant, but you still have to continue to improve it. So you don't get to just stick with Well, we passed it, we're good, let's just stay the way we are. So where do we start, right? So the first thing is to start with people. So who are the people, not only on your core team, but also who are the different business units, so stakeholders, who are going to be working with to implement this? Because it's not just going to be you. You're going to have people from IT. Depending on your scope, it might be professional services. It might be people who, if you're an MSSP, people who handle the customer data, things like that. You're going to be having to deal with different stakeholders. So figuring out who they are and finding those people that can preach the security gospel, and those that are going to be a big pain in your ass. Figure out who they are and start working with them. And then process, right? So one of the most important things is to figure out what your processes are. So instead of writing these beautiful, 50-page SOPs of a process that you don't even come close to following, write down what you actually do, okay? Start there. If you can just make sure that everybody's doing what they say they actually do, that's actually a great start in the right direction. Because at that point, you can start wrapping technology around it to either enforce that process or control it in different ways. And then let's talk about one of the pieces to start with processes too. So one of the mistakes I've made is that I have done, I'll start rolling out an HR security SOP before I even have some of the core processes I need to have in place first. So what are those core processes? You need to have, your committee procedures. How are you going to meet? How are you going to write your documents, your control records, control documents SOPs, your audit SOP, your training SOP. Some of those core SOPs, and maybe corrective action, preventive action, because if you roll out the other SOPs, how are you going to audit it to make sure it's working? How are you going to handle it if it breaks? You need to have some of the core infrastructure set up first before you start rolling out the big network operations SOP, things like that. If you don't have those things in place first, it's going to be very difficult to deal with those as those things need to mature and improve. So scope. Yeah. Know and define your scope, and don't overcomplicate it. So what is your most critical assets? What are the things that drive revenue? That's probably going to be your scope. Or maybe it's IT operations because that touches everybody, but they don't necessarily have to feel it, okay, as much. But picking your scope and understanding, what is the most important piece. So where I work, it's our customer data. At the end of the day, I feel really bad if our employee data got leaked out, but that's not going to stop revenue. I'll have employees to apologize to. So, figuring out what the real scope should be. And then those boundaries, all right? And those, so keep it clean, keep it enforceable, turn whether in or out, right? What are those boundaries? What is the scope? So especially if you have a PCI, you have a CDE environment, what are those actual boundaries of your perimeter? For FedRAMP, same kind of thing. You have to really understand what those boundaries are and understand how that data flows in and out. So maturity, all right? So one of the things to think about is that when you start off, this can take, depending on the size of your organization, it can take a year, it can take 2 years, depending on how big you are, right? But once you hit this managed state where you actually have, at least they might be manual processes, but you have those in place, you're able to start really quickly accelerating and getting to that quantitatively managed spot. And that's where automation comes into play, all these awesome tools that they sell out there, that's great stuff. But if you don't have a process, what are you automating? Figure out what you need to automate first. What is that process? How is this supposed to look? What are you going to control? So, maturing to the next phase. How do we go from a bunch of Iraqi Army soldiers to the Marine Corps drill team? All right? So, that click pop, right? It's pretty sexy. Or you can be like that, which is what, you probably start off when you get started, right? All right. Lessons learned. Anybody ever served in the military knows there's some lessons you learn in the gas chamber pretty quick. All right, so compliance fails. So, organizations stopping once the policy's drafted. One of the things you have to recognize is that your procedures are going to change. Even if you wrote the most perfect procedure in the world, if your organization grows at 10% a year, it's probably going to have to change at least 10% just to keep up. All right, so understanding that you have to do that. So, one of the things I recommend is getting a good piece of SOP management software. I've used Policy Tech in the past. It's like an AKA. I don't sell that thing or anything like that. It's not a plug. It's just the thing works because it lets you make sure that you can control you can push out your SOPs, make sure you can get people to read them when they've changed. And one of the things I've seen at the last place I was at, they were tracking SOP approvals via email. Try approving that to an auditor. Like, that's going to suck. So think about those things. Those are some of the core things I would, you want to get in place if you can. Just because security technology is implemented, it's not protected. You have hips with an any rule. It doesn't do shit for you. But, you're compliant. Poor configurations, policies for the sake of policies. When I got to Sherwell, they had an 8-page password policy. It was horrible. Like, I didn't want to read it. And this is what we do, right? So, cut it down to 2 paragraphs and put it in acceptable use and move the heck on, right? Keep it as simple as you can. So, and that's one of the things when I started, they had 50 policies, 3 SOPs, okay? So, they had these policies that they're works of art. Should be framed. I mean, an 8-page password policy, that's pretty impressive. But, at the end of the day, what good is it, right? No one knows how to follow it. So, if you have all these policies, you gotta make sure that you want SOPs, you want to make sure they know how they actually can follow the policy or the procedure that you're actually trying to enforce that control. Most people will try to follow the procedure if it's clear, but if it doesn't say, go here, send an email to this distro, that's how you make sure you're actually able to make your procedures useful. Policies, talk about that. Policies don't make any damn sense. One of the things I struggle with is, you have rules like no BYOD, yet you can bring your phone, but you can't bring a tablet. Right? Think about it though, right? Your tablet, it's the same basic OS, right? So what's the point, right? So let's, those are challenges I have, and I'm happy to talk afterwards about how you guys have tackled those ones as well. So compliance wins. Yeah, it can actually not suck totally, all right? So baseline of your security controls. So at the end of the day, when you start off, at least now you're actually looking at it from a holistic standpoint and not just looking at it from one spot. Now, where you improve is going to be dependent on your budget, your ability to execute, as well as what is what's really relevant to you. What's your data? Where you really want to spend your effort. Does your physical security matter that much? As long as they can't connect, or where do you want to spend your time? You can't spend your time everywhere, so it helps you start to figure out where you can slowly incrementally increase different parts of your controls. And they address a lot of people and process. So you can do a lot of free security with good people and process. For all the pen testers out there, oh, well, I can still do this and that and this. And I'm looking at a couple of guys I've hired a few times along the way, and they're like, well, I can still do whatever. But that's fine. But what's the people and process? What's the process? Let's make sure you're following it, because then I can put those technical controls in place, right? So, and that covers a lot of it. You're still dealing with insider threats, I get it, but it's a starting point. You have to start somewhere, because you can't get that incremental progress if you don't start somewhere and just move from there. All right? Mandating improvements, so that's why I love ISO. And mechanism for budget. So the way my risk assessment works, when I do a risk assessment, I do it off of the business process and the information assets it creates, right? I don't do a risk assessment on a server. Who gives a shit about the server? What we really care about is the data on that server, what business processes are critical to that server. And so when you're sitting down with the CFO, it's a whole lot easier to say, I need this to protect this business process, this line of revenue that drives this amount, this X amount, as opposed to, I need it because it's cool, Like, why do you need this? It's for this business process. That resonates a lot better with an executive team than it will with, just you get into the bits and bytes of, well, I need an ESSA scanner, a quality scanner, I need all this stuff. Like, for what? Why? What are the business processes we're protecting? Why are we doing it? Because that's what this isn't a non-for-profit. We're doing this for to maintain revenue, right? To make sure we protect that revenue, protect that data, so that our stuff's not out there. And then toolkit. So one of the things I use is the Cloud Security Alliance questionnaire. So when you get those RFP questions from your customers, and like somebody sends you one Excel sheet with 70 questions, the next guy sends you one with 20 questions, the next guy sends you one with 300. This is a way to streamline that. So this thing has 300 questions, and it will literally answer everything that customer is going to need to know. It's a very nice compliance piece, and sometimes they'll save you time as opposed to answering their questions. Answer them ahead of time. I recommend it. And the nice part about it too is it actually has a mapping for every single framework out there. So it's got NERC, FERPA, everything out there. So you can actually say, okay, you're a SOC 2, you're an SA16 shop, that's what you care about. Here's how my ISO controls map to this, as opposed to, well, you don't have this, you don't have that. This is how you can get through those issues when you're dealing with compliance people on the other side. Excel, a lot of people start in Excel. It's fine. Get some good compliance management software out there if you want to. SOP management software, compliance veterans, so finding people out there that have been through this. How did you get through this? How were you able to tackle this issue? How did you handle that control? Finding those guys out there. And then KRIs and KPIs. That's one of the big things that we use. So we use key risk indicators, and that can be my, how many vulnerabilities have aged past a certain date, or whatever. But the key performance indicators would be more like, hey, background checks versus employees hired every month. And that way I can make sure that my process, my SOP is actually performing as it's designed, so I can check the performance of it as well as the risk. Those are things you want to think about. And then a poor man's threat feed. So this is, talk about internal, external things. So this is a screenshot of what I use. So this is a tweet deck. It's free. But the nice part about it is I can plug stuff in that I think is interesting. I have like locations, so I have spots, look at different offices, see what's going on there. Look at Sherwell, so I'll sit there and figure out, I don't make sure no one's tweeting something heinous, the CEO doesn't get on a rampage about something crazy. You never know. That's happened to one of the casinos in this area. And then, looking at Brian Krebs, stuff like that, right? Hopefully he never calls me. So I'm leaving. All right, how to work with others. So be polite, be professional, have a plan killer when you meet, right? General Mattis. All right, so sales. It is all about them. So when you're engaging with sales and then you do their security training, hey, if you don't do your security training, how am I supposed to get on a call to the customer and tell them that we're secure? Do you like selling? Let's make sure we do our security training. Marketing, they're arts and crafts masters, right? So if you deploy something like Titus, it's a document classification thing, let them pick the font. Let them pick where it sits. Who cares? Let them pick that stuff. They're happy as long as you have a classification on it, right? One of the things we did with Control Records, Control Docs, as opposed to writing out this big thing of we're going to use Courier New or New Times Roman 12, we said we're going to follow whatever marketing is using, and that way marketing is happy because we're going to help enforce what they're doing. And at the same time, I'm not getting in a battle over Trillium 11 or whatever font they want to use. Like, this is not a battle worth having, right? So make your compliance easy. Finance, it helps them control spending. So use them, they can help you. So when they're buying new software, hey, make sure we check it beforehand. They're happy to delay spend if they can, so it's an opportunity, right? Audit, be ready. This is what I wear to my audit. Why? Because it's fun, right? And I'm treating it as seriously as I can, right? So, if you show up in a t-shirt and shorts, it might look sloppy, right? You want to show like you've got your A game on. Take the fight to the enemy. So what I do is I literally, a month before and about the weekend before, I go through every single control and walk through how I'm going to prove all of those and where that evidence is. And so when I'm sitting before the auditor, I'm taking them to it. So this way, at a minimum, I might wind up with maybe a minor, maybe an information finding, but I can show them some good evidence before they go look at bad evidence, Because it may not be perfect, but at least you can show them that you are trying to follow the process. But thinking about how you're going to prove it, because the auditors smell blood. They're like sharks. So if you sit there and you're like, it's all quiet, when they ask you a question, it doesn't look so well. So take the fight to them, drive them. They're only there for so long. Finding a GRC process doesn't suck, at least totally. That's important. Think about that. Figuring out how you're going to handle those corrective actions, those preventative actions, things like that. So one of the challenges I think we all have from time to time is trying to understand what the control actually means. You know, from a security standpoint, well, I gotta have this. Well, it doesn't really say that. I mean, you read HIPAA, and do you even really have to have, you know, data at rest encryption, or you just have to make sure the data is protected? You know, so there's things to think about. All right. Risk assessment. Hey, you know, audit the processes, integrate with finance and legal. So ask yourself, what is the financial implications, legal implications of these processes failing? And assess the value of the data. So look at it from an information asset standpoint, more so than from a server or a USB stick, right? And that's it. Any questions?
How you doing?
Good.
What experience do you have with the risk management framework for federal information systems?
So you're talking about NIST?
Yeah, the NIST standards, yes.
So it's basically Plan, Do, Check, Act. Yeah, so that's a great question, and I could definitely follow up further offline, but the federal risk management framework is not that much different than the old ISO risk management framework, or the 31000 series. It's Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's a little bit different, but it's all basically the same. You know, it's assess you make your, what's your unmitigated risk, and what's your mitigated risk? Being able to quantitatively prove that is one of the big pieces too. You know, so making sure you ask yourself repeatable questions, as opposed to, well, I'm gonna give myself 3 points because I've got proof point, right? Or whatever. Well, that doesn't, that's great, but that's not necessary. You wanna make sure you have good questions on the downward side as well. Does that help?
I guess what I'm asking is because I looked at that compared to the certain set of the ISO controls versus the RMF's controls, and it looks like there's like a shit ton more of controls. I'm like, why is there so many?
Oh, so you're talking about the actual NIST, the 300 controls they have?
Yeah, I mean that's a lot.
Absolutely. It's more granular, and it's a little more specific, and it's definitely less, ISO says you need to meet the control, but it doesn't necessarily tell you how, whereas it gives you guidance, whereas with NIST, it's going to give you, especially like FedRAMP, which is basically NIST on steroids, it's going to be much more prescriptive on how you're going to meet that control. I don't know if that helps.
Not really.
Sorry.
But thank you.
All right, any more questions? Let's
All
give
right.
them a round of
Nice.
applause.